I did in the email, because I wrote it and then I copy and paste those emails onto my website for my other students, and I was thinking I was giving them 2 weeks, and don't, just chill. Don't worry about it. I just thought it would be to maximize the number of papers I could give back to people next week on the last week. But you can just bring it next week. Don't sweat it. And all my other students got 2 weeks for this assignment, so it's only fair. I have several kind of busy things I want to do today. Some of you I've heard back from, and it looks like we are going to do some sort of meeting at my house. For those of you that can make it, I will inform your families what day. You know, we had a plan A and a plan B, and I need to count the numbers and see what is going to work best for people. It might just be a movie. It might be the classes. You can always, if you want to read the last book with me, you know, the videos will be online and you could read it and then just watch the class, and there'd be no assignment, you know, writing or anything for you. But we can talk more about that next week, and let me make sure I hear back from everybody, and I'll tell you the plan. So at the very least, we can get together, some of us, and have pizza and watch this crazy funny movie. And maybe have some class, but maybe not. Okay, it would be a little, if we do have class that next time, it would be kind of tough because you'd have to read the whole. We do in 1 week what my other students would do in 2, so it would be kind of rushed. And if you can't make it, don't worry about it. I want to make you feel bad if you can't, if your family has plans. It's just the way it is. It's not even going to be particularly fancy pizza. And you can get the movie and watch it yourself, so it'll be fine. You know what? Amen, Alex. Except for, or though, what is it, Harris Pizza, the one that's really kind of greasy? I don't love that. Okay, we're not going to talk about pizza anymore. All right. I want to give you, I have 3 parts of the Fall of Rome. I'm going to do it in 2 weeks for you, a little bit this week, a little bit next week. If you would turn with me to page 115 in the back of your reading guide. I have an outline, and I am going to rip through this baby like gangbusters. I am sorry for that. This is not good teaching, but I felt like the books we are reading, especially some of you will read Confessions and then you will just stop, and it leaves you hanging. So what happened to the Roman Empire? And I don't want you to just be hanging historically when the books we're reading aren't going to tell us, okay? So let's just run through this outline really quick. Okay, so we already talked about the fact that after Constantine died, he had 3 sons, all variations on the name Constantine. And eventually only Constantius was left. He controlled the east, but he put his cousin Julian in the west. And when Constantius died, his cousin Julian took over the whole thing. Julian is known to us as Julian the Apostate. Apostasy is falling away from Christianity. Okay, you can't be an apostate if you were never a Christian. It's you were, or you seemed to be, and you fell away from it. Julian talked the talk and walked the walk as far as people could tell. But he was also secretly meeting with all sorts of pagan priests and philosophers and things. And when he didn't have any more restraints on him, he just let it all out. He started rebuilding all the pagan temples. He forbade Christians to teach literature. No Christian teachers in schools, in other words. Because I don't want you giving your Christian spin to our literature. He rehashed the whole pagan hierarchy. He said, you know, those Christians are pretty smart. This whole diocese, bishop, priest, hierarchy thing, that's pretty awesome. We're going to do that, but make it pagan. So he just copied it. He just copied everything that the church had put in place for 300 years and said, we're just going to have pagan priests and pagan bishops and just copy it. Yes?
Were Christian youth back then, was it more of a, like, you can lose your faith? Or was it more of a, he appeared to be a Christian, but his heart wasn't in the right place? Because, I
Okay, I'm going to briefly, because you've asked, I will briefly answer. I think that much of modern Christianity can't understand the answer to that question because in the ancient world, as far as we can tell, saved wasn't something that happened once for all. It was always a process. So even today, Catholics will say, I have been saved, I am being saved, and I hope to be saved. It's a process because, like Jesus said, someday he's going to divide the sheep and the goats, and it's based on, did you do it? Did you clothe the naked? Did you visit the sick? This is the basis. And there's some branches of Christianity that don't like to hear that, but that's what the Bible says, and that's what the early church believed. So it was always every morning I have to get up and decide to be that today. And I have the choice to stop being that. However, Ethan, only God knows Julian's heart, whether he ever once upon a time actually meant it or whether he was always going through the motions. So that's my double answer. I think that it was always, salvation is a process as far as the earliest Christians are concerned. It's not, it happened and now I'm saved. There was never that moment. But also only God knows the heart. So, yeah.
Looking at the reading guide for these next for B, it didn't seem to go very good falling away from it.
You know, it didn't. It didn't. And I think I told you the story. He died in battle with the Persians. There are two versions of his death, but the most popular one is that he's laying there bleeding and he grabs blood and he flings at the sky and says, "You've conquered, O Galilean," which makes a good story, whether it actually happened. Not long after his death, there was a massive, very destructive earthquake. And there were two groups of people. The group of people who said, you know that earthquake, it's because Julian brought back all the pagan stuff. And then there was a group that said, you know that earthquake, it's because Julian died and we stopped doing the pagan stuff and the Christians came back. Each side blames the other. It's your fault. Keep that in mind because that idea of blaming people for the destructiveness in the empire, that's a theme of Augustine's biggest book, The City of God. And that I'm going to talk a little bit about next week. Okay, so Julian's gone. We have two brothers, Valens and Valentinian in the East and West. Valentinian, oh, and by the way, this is my imaginary map now. This is the Mediterranean. All the barbarian groups, the Germanic groups are pushing in everywhere. And by the way, if we get done early, maybe I'll try to get done early. There's this awesome video. If I don't have time today, I'll do it next week. An animated map of the Roman Empire. It's got dates running in the corner, and it shows the spread, and it shows the shrink. It's really cool. It'll last a minute and a half, so we'll see. If I don't have time today, try to remind me tomorrow. So Valentinian is dealing with this. Tribes are invading Britain. Germans are crossing the Rhine River. Other Germans are crossing the Danube River. He's dealing with this group, the Quadi, and I'll tell this story because it's kind of funny, except not funny in a sick way. He sends a messenger to this group, the Quadi, up on the Germanic frontier, and he tells his envoy, this messenger, go deal with this, make a peace treaty with these Quadi because they're causing problems. And the guy invites the Quadi to a peace treaty dinner, and then he has them all murdered. It's not what Valentinian had in mind. So the Quadi start a war because, hello, you just murdered us at a peace dinner. And Valentinian is irritated by this, obviously, because peace was the point, not a new war. Finally, and the Quadi had the audacity to blame the Romans for all of this, from Valentinian's point of view. So a messenger comes from the Quadi and basically says as much in Valentinian's presence. Your guy killed us all at dinner. How is this our fault? And Valentinian got so upset, he becomes enraged at this guy, and he has an aneurysm. his blood vessel bursts in his head and he just falls down dead. Don't ever get too angry with people. Just let it go. It's not worth it. Yeah. Has an aneurysm and just drops down dead in front of the Quadi envoy.
That messenger must have been like, say.
Yeah. In the East, his brother Valens is an Arian. He's an Arian heretic. He's dealing with the Goths. The Goths had been sort of north of where Greece is today, the Balkans, we call that area. And they had been living and coexisting peacefully with the Romans for quite a while. The Romans gave them land, the Goths helped guard the borders, and it's a win-win. Except that the Goths get really tired of not getting treated like Romans. You still treat us like barbarians. So Valens gets into it with the Goths. Valens named Valentinian's son Gratian emperor in the West, and then went and died in the battle with the Goths. Theodosius takes over in the East after Valens. Theodosius took Christianity exceedingly seriously. I did not put this in the outline, but Theodosius is the one who makes Christianity the official religion of the empire. Before it was just legal. Theodosius, it is the official. We give our stamp of approval to Christianity. He had the altar of victory removed from the Senate building, because there's still a Senate. Things aren't going well in the empire, but there's still a Senate. And they still have the altar to victory. Like, no, pagan god, out. And the Senate, like, please, can't we have our altar of victory? No, out. He was the first emperor who said, not taking the Pontifex Maximus title. Chief priest of the Rome, no, that's pagan thing, not doing it. Not doing it. He imposes Nicene Christianity, which means not Arian, in the East, confiscated churches from the Arians, had the fire of the Vestal Virgins put out. The Vestal Virgins are sort of like nuns. They're committed to celibacy. You start when you're 10 years old, little girls, and they have 10 years of training, 10 years of serving, and 10 years of training the next group. 30-year stint, severe penalties for finding out you slept with someone, breaking your duties in any way. They tend the fire of Rome. It's like Rome's hearth fire, the Vestal Virgins. And he's like, no, we're not doing that anymore. Pagan practice, done. Put the fire out. He also ended the Olympic Games. Theodosius, that was the last, until 1896, last Olympic Games. Not doing it. It's for Zeus, not doing it. So he was very serious about this. Unfortunately, he has some, we had some issues. We'll pop down there in a minute, though, but let's talk about his co-emperor Valentinian II. Valentinian II's mother was an Arian. And she was in Italy, and there was a bishop in Milan named Ambrose. You met him in Confessions this week. Ambrose stood up to the emperor's mother. And she said, we're taking your church, Ambrose, and we're handing it over to the Arians. And he said, I'd like to see you try. Although I'm sure he did not say it exactly that way. And they staged a sit-in, basically. They wouldn't leave the church. Ambrose was one of the earliest hymn writers. They sang Ambrose hymns and prayed and just sat in the church all night. And eventually the soldiers just went away because it just wasn't worth the effort. And Ambrose saved the church. Ambrose, however, had a run-in with the other emperor, Theodosius, as well. Theodosius, like we said, good guy. He's ending pagan practices all over. I'm at D now, 3D. The Roman governor, in an area north of Greece, North Turkey, imprisoned a chariot racer who the people loved. He was the darling of the people. and he wouldn't let him go. And so the people rioted and they killed the governor because their favorite sports figure was in prison. And so Theodosius's response was to send soldiers in and massacre several thousand of the inhabitants. I think, not sure it was at Thessalonica, but I'm not totally sure. That was a lot of, and then he has the audacity to show up in Milan and knock on Ambrose's door. I'm coming to church and I want to take communion. Ambrose says, fat chance. You're a dirty, rotten murderer. You better repent. I'm not giving you communion. Oh, yeah. And Theodosius says, well, I'm the emperor. Like, Guess you'll just have to kill me because I'm not doing it. And Theodosius gave in. Theodosius went to confession. Theodosius was excommunicated for 8 months while he went through various penances to prove that he was actually repentant before Ambrose let him come back in and take communion. And I mention this at length because next year we will study the Middle Ages. And some of you are aware that one of the big issues of the Middle Ages is who is more important, the church or the king? Who's the boss? What if they disagree with each other? Who do I obey? Does the church rule the king or does the king rule the church? Or are they two separate entities and they don't cross? We don't know. But this was the first case where the church just beat the king. The church just told the emperor, hit the road. Hit the road. I'm not doing what you tell me to do, and you better do appropriate penance before you come in here and think I'm going to give you this. It was big. Meanwhile, those Goths are still not very happy that they're treated like barbarians. And a guy named Alaric, he had actually been a regiment commander under Theodosius. He was fighting in the Roman army, but he still never got his props, He never got a promotion, and he knew it was because he was a Goth. And so finally, this goes just briefly on to the next page. He brings together all the scattered Gothic tribes. He says, you know what? We need unity. We can get our rights if we band together. And he went to Theodosius. He's like, we demand our rights. We want a homeland. And he cleverly said, oh, we don't have any place for you, but I've heard Italy is lovely. Why don't you go to Italy? My gosh. And they did. They did. And they rampaged through Italy and they sacked Rome in 410. For the first time since 386 BC, when those Gauls swooped down and Camillus was there and he was, the whole story that we read in Livy, everybody's jaw just dropped to the floor. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Goths are rampaging through Rome? St. Jerome, known for translating the Bible into Latin, said, my voice sticks in my throat and sobs choke my utterance. The city which has taken the whole world was itself taken. And this event inspired Augustine to write his famous book, The City of God, which I will talk a little more about next week, or if we end up with time at the end, but I don't anticipate that. And then I have a long quote. This is Jerome writing about the sack of Rome. I'm not reading all of this. You can read it. But skip down to the next to last paragraph. Okay, it starts, who could believe this? I'm going to read those two. Who could believe this? How could the whole tale be worthily told? How Rome has fought within her own bosom, not for glory, but for preservation. Nay, how she has not even fought, but with gold and all her precious things has ransomed her life. Who could believe that Rome, built upon the conquest of the whole world, would fall to the ground? That the mother herself would become the tomb of her peoples? That all the regions of the east, of Africa and Egypt, once ruled by the queenly city, would be filled with troops of slaves and handmaidens? That today holy Bethlehem should shelter men and women of noble birth who once abounded in wealth and are now beggars? These people in Africa and the east, in Bethlehem, they're refugees. They're the nobility of Rome who have hit the road. They packed their bags. They fled with everything they could carry to get away from the Goths. Jerome himself lived in the east. He lived outside of Bethlehem. And he saw it. poor, I mean, people who were not poor once upon a time, but all they have is what they have on their backs and in this bag I'm carrying. That's all my worldly possessions now. It's all gone. The Goths have it. And it blew everyone away. Rome was going down. And no one could believe it could ever happen. It's not down and out, though. This is 410, and the official ending of the Roman Empire date is 476. We will talk next week about what happens in 476 to make it so that we consider the Roman Empire in the West done. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. That is not good at all for me to just spit a bunch of stuff on an outline out at you. But I hope it gives you an idea of what's happening. They're being encroached by angry tribes, angry because some of them have been friendly with Rome, frankly, and they don't understand why Rome still treats them shabbily. And things are falling apart because we have emperors who, I don't know, get so angry they burst blood vessels while they're talking to envoys. It's not good. It's not good. Okay. Our art is, I'm not going to pass it around, even though it's kind of small, but I think you can kind of see it, maybe if I walk through. This is a sarcophagus. This is the sarcophagus of a man named Junius Bassus, who died in 359. How do I know such specific things? Because it's written on the top of his sarcophagus. Translated, this is what it says on his sarcophagus. Junius Bassus, vir clarissimus. So title, most famous man, very famous man, a nobleman, in other words. 42 years and 2 months old, performing duties of city prefect, went newly baptized to God on August 25th during the consulate of Eusebius and Hypatius. That's what it says. He's a Christian. So this sarcophagus is very much, it's almost scary, very much like Roman sarcophagi, except they would be decorated with scenes from mythology. This is scenes from the Bible. It's the same style, but they use scenes. So we have Adam and Eve here. We have Abraham taking his son Isaac to be sacrificed. And it's fascinating because we don't need to remake the wheel. This is a pretty style. We like the style. Let's just substitute biblical scenes here's Adam and Eve. Here's Abraham and Isaac. And so it's kind of like a Roman city official meets Christianity and uses as his sarcophagus a Roman style with Christian themes. So that is so 359. Augustine is probably a young, I can't remember when he's born exactly, probably a young man. Augustine was living when this man died, when the sarcophagus was made. Okay, on to the confessions. You sound excited. All right. Last week we said that Augustine's theme is that he loved the wrong things, or he loved the right things too much, more than they were worth, or in the wrong way. And he had that heartbreaking comment last week where he said, I badly wanted to love something. And maybe it's this girl. Maybe it's philosophy after I found that book by Cicero. Maybe it's the Manichaean stories of how the elect can the elect can't pull the figs off the tree because it kills the fig. Can't kill the fig. We have to have the lesser people pick the fig. But when I eat the fig, I will disperse the particles of good, and the particles of God will go into the universe when I breathe them out, and I will do my part in conquering evil. Lauren, you look like you don't believe that.
I'm just laughing.
It is very silly, and you should laugh. And eventually, Augustine started laughing at it too. But the first important thing that happens in book 4 is the first question I asked you. What happens to his young friend that Augustine finds devastating? What happened to his friend?
He
He dies.
It was so sudden.
It was very sudden. And Augustine takes it very hard. And of course, you would. It's his friend. But we know Augustine well enough at this point to know he's not just going to say that. Well, people get sad when their friends die. He's going to analyze it and philosophize on it. But he says some really interesting things. First of all, I'm going to read from chapter 4. Now that we've figured out how to find book 4, chapter 4, and it's the final paragraph in my book. Final paragraph. So hopefully it's not going to be the same words, but it's going to mean the same thing. My heart grew somber with grief, and wherever I looked, I saw only death. My own country became a torment, and my own home a grotesque abode of misery. All that we had done together was now a grim ordeal without him. My eyes searched everywhere for him, but he was not there to be seen. I hated all the places we had known together because he was not in them, and they could no longer whisper to me, "Here he comes," as they would have done had he been alive but absent for a while. I had become a puzzle to myself, asking my soul again and again, "Why are you downcast? Why do you distress me?" But my soul had no answer to give. If I said, "Wait for God's help," she did not obey. All right, I'm going to stop there. You might think he's being extreme. Okay, actually, let me read one more thing. Chapter 6, it's the third paragraph for me. I wondered that other men should live when he was dead, for I had loved him as though he would never die. Still more, I wondered that he should die and I remain alive, for I was his second self. How well the poet put it when he called his friend the half of his soul. This strikes me. I wondered that other men should live when he was dead, for I'd loved him as though he would never die. And I got to tell you, so perhaps, I'm sorry, I'm sniffly because of spring. Perhaps this has happened to you already, but it did not happen to me until I was in my late 20s. I had had deaths before, great-grandparents, but my grandma died on a May afternoon in 1995 when I was in my late 20s. And I knew now what Augustine meant because I was in shock. My grandma was only 75 years old. She made dinner for my grandpa. My grandpa went to the garden. Grandma set out to look at the spring flowers, and he came back, and she's dead on the porch. And I got a phone call that said, interestingly, Mary Ruth is dead on the porch. What? And so this idea that you look at the world and you think, how dare all you people go about your business? Don't you know my grandma died? Don't you know? And Dante, we're going to read the Divine Comedy next year. He had a woman he was very attached to named Beatrice. And he says the same thing. He wandered through the streets of Florence and he was angry with people for joking and laughing. He's like, how can you do that? Don't you know the world is a completely different place now because this person is gone? And this is how Augustine feels. And it's horrible. But he says, so I did not philosophize. I only said, I'm really sad because my grandma died. Okay, I'm not Augustine. Augustine's examining it, and his diagnosis is when we love something so much and we think it will never die. We think we will never lose it. And I'm not saying walk around all the time reminding yourself that everybody you love is going to die someday. Don't live that way. But also know that the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away, as Job said, okay? Anyway, this was the shock that came to me, but not until I was older than you. And no one could have described, I'd read this before, but then I'm like, oh, that's what he means. I'm going to the grocery store, I'm just ticked off with everybody. How dare you smile? My grandma died. Don't you know? They don't know. And it changes your world. It changes your world. And perhaps one of you has already had this loss. And I grieve with you. But this is when it came to Augustine. And he says this at the beginning of chapter 6. He said, I lived in misery like every man whose soul is tethered by the love of things that cannot last and then is agonized to lose them. You know, loving someone is one thing, but tethering your soul to them is another thing. My soul can only be tethered to God, says Augustine, because he's the only one who will never go away in this world. I mean, I hope and pray that I will be with my grandma again someday, you know, but for now, she's been dead more than half my life now. And I was tethered to her, all right? Loved her. And Augustine wants to use this, though, as a springboard. You know, remember, he's the old Augustine looking back over the years. How did I feel? And why did I feel so intensely? Because if you have felt it or when you feel it, it does not last forever. I'm not angry at everyone for living anymore. Right? It's okay. I should live. I'm not angry. And it gets better. It goes away. And Augustine is obviously healed from this death of his friend at the point that he's writing this. But he says something really interesting about friendship. And this is in chapter 4. And it's about halfway down the first paragraph in my version. Though they cling together, no friends are true friends unless you, my God, bind them fast to one another through that love which is sown in our hearts by the Holy Ghost who is given to us. He said something very remarkable there. No friends are true friends unless God binds them together. You know, if God binds you to someone, you can't ever lose that. You might lose the person for a while, but you will get them back. And they still exist. They still exist in the Lord, with him. They're getting their bodies back someday. When you get your new body, they're coming back. And this made me think, and some of you will remember this from last year, and if you don't, if you weren't here last year, it's fine. We read a book of Aristotle called The Ethics last year, towards the end of the year. I think it was the last thing we read. And we read about friendship. And Aristotle said there were 3 kinds of friends. Useful friends, pleasurable friends, and perfect friends. You might remember this. If you don't, it's totally fine. He says, those who love each other on the ground of utility do not love each other for their personal qualities, but only insofar as they derive some benefit from each other. Now that sounds very cynical and cold, but we do it all the time. For example, you're involved in a carpool with a group, and you strike up a relationship, a friendship of sorts with them. But when the carpool ends, you're probably not going to hang out with them. It was just, you know, we were thrown together. It was useful. Similarly with those who love one another on the ground of pleasure, because it is not for being of a certain character that witty people are liked, but because we find them pleasant. Sometimes we just like people because they're cool. They're funny. They say funny things. They're fun to be around. But I don't love them because of who they are inside necessarily. But then he says, only the friendship of those who are good and similar in their goodness is perfect. Each loves the other for what he is. Each party is good both absolutely and for his friend, since the good are both good absolutely and useful to each other. And they please one another too. They have the other two. They're useful and pleasant. But there's something more. Friendship of this kind is permanent, he says. When the usefulness fades, sometimes the friendship fades. If somebody becomes not pleasant anymore, you're no fun to be around anymore. I'm not calling you. Not that I would ever do that or have ever done that to anyone. but the perfect friendship, a good man and a good man, good for each other and good absolutely. Now, here's my hypothesis. Augustine may be taking this to the next level. Augustine already said he's read Aristotle. Augustine is a well-educated man. I have no doubt that he read this book. But there's another kind. We have useful friends, pleasant friends, good people being good friends with each other as equals and loving the character of that person. And friends linked together in God. It's like the super friendship where, and obviously you can't have that friendship unless you're both Christians. That would be a prerequisite for that. But it's like Aristotle's perfect friendship on steroids, you know? It's the perfect friendship because it will never have to end. It will end here for a while, probably. But that communion of saints, that idea that the departed Christians are conscious and aware with God now. And if I'm part of the body of Christ and they're part of the body of Christ and there's only one body of Christ, we're still in the same body. We're just unfortunately not able to communicate. Although many Christian traditions would say we are able to communicate one way. And that is the what is known as praying to the saints, all right? My dad is also departed. And if I said, Dad, pray for me today. Dad, will you pray for me today? That's what that means. You're there. You know what's going on. And you're not distracted by all of life's woes and troubles anymore. Pray for me. And you don't have to agree with that practice. I'm not here to sell that. But I'm saying that's what Augustine believed. And so if you're joined together with this friend in God, you are still joined because you're part of the same body of Christ. Yeah.
So how I was always told was that I was praying to the saints about, but
It comes partly from the word pray. You know, old-fashioned use of pray is pray tell, what was your day like? Okay, and I'm not praying to you when I say that. Do you know what I mean? It means to ask for a favor. Anyway, that's something for you to discuss with your families. I'm not selling that in any way except that Augustine would have seen it that way. But that occurred to me when I read that about friendship. I thought, wait a minute, it's like Aristotle, except more so. Yes. Okay, I've lost my page. Just a second. All right. So after his friend dies, what are some of the things that Augustine uses to fill the void? He's got a gap in his life now for a while. I mean, always a little bit, but for a while intensely. Did you notice any of the things? What did you find that he devotes himself to fill the void? Anybody? You can't. Okay, so in chapter 8, so I'm still in book 4. I'll tell you when we move out of book 4. In chapter 8, I don't know, into the first paragraph, he says, my greatest comfort and relief was in the solace of other friends who shared my love for the huge fable, which I loved instead of you. His Manichae friends. They love the same things. In other words, he replaces his friend with more of the same. More people that I guess maybe Aristotle would say these are friends of pleasure because they take pleasure in being both in the same sect. That's one thing I found. He also says he starts contemplating beauty. So we could call this philosophizing. In chapter 13, he says, I was in love with beauty of a lower order and it was dragging me down. I used to ask my friends, do we love anything unless it is beautiful? What then is beauty and in what does it consist? What is it that attracts us and wins us over to the things we love? Unless there were beauty and grace in them, they would be powerless to win our hearts. When I looked at things, it struck me that there was a difference between the beauty of an object considered by itself as one whole, and the beauty to be found in a proper proportion between separate things, such as the due balance between the whole of the body and any of its limbs, or between the foot and the shoe with which it is shod, and so on. This idea burst from my heart like water from a spring. My mind was full of it, and I wrote a book called Beauty in Proportion in 2 or 3 volumes, as far as I remember. You know how many there were, O Lord. I have forgotten because by some chance the book was lost and I no longer have it. If I wrote 3 volumes of a book and I lost it, I can't even imagine. Yeah, I wrote that book once. Lost that one. I guess that was happened when you write a bajillion books. It's like, yeah, I lost that one though. It's just that one. Wow. So he contemplates beauty. He also flings himself into learning. In chapter 16, he says he picked up Aristotle and he read a book called The Categories, which I actually just had to read part of for my class that I'm taking. And he said, you know what? A lot of people say this is really hard to understand. I read it. I don't see the problem. It's because you're a brainiac, Augustine, and you're really smart. He says I don't know. This is okay, I'll try. 1, 2, 3. This is the 4th paragraph of chapter 16 for me. I don't know if it is for you. I read and understood by myself all the books that I could find on the so-called liberal arts. For in those days I was a good for nothing and a slave to sordid ambitions. But what advantage did I gain from them? I read with pleasure, but I did not know the real source of such true and certain facts as they contained. I had my back to the light, and my face was turned towards the things which it illumined, so that my eyes, by which I saw the things which stood in the light, were themselves in darkness. He says, I was like a person. I'm sitting and the light is behind me and my eyes are focused on the darkness in front of me. Okay, does anybody in this room remember a story where somebody's sitting there and the light is behind you and all you can see are the shadows in front of
I
you?
was just thinking that what is it called though?
We call it Plato's Cave because it was in the Republic. So those of you who didn't read this story, but just like a refresher, let me tell you the story. Plato tells the story. He said, here's what philosophers are like. What if you were in a cave and you were chained? So you could only look one direction. You couldn't even move your head. And all you can see is in front of you. There's a light, there's a fire behind you. And people pass back and forth behind your head in front of the fire, and they cast shadows on the wall in front of you. And all you can see are the shadows. And you think the shadows are all there is. The shadows are the reality. Because you can't turn your head. But one of you gets loose. You turn your eyes like, do you know there's a really bright light back there? And there's people, there's shadows. That's image. The real people are actually walking back and forth, and all your friends say, oh, you're stupid. Shadows, that's all there is. That's all there is. Because the people behind you talk, and their voice echoes off the wall of the cave. And you hear them. Like, don't you hear them talking? You're like, no, they're talking back there. Like, you're nuts. And then he said, what if this person who gets free goes out of the cave and sees the sun? First, you can't see. Like when you go to the movies during the day, we've all done it. And then you come out and you're just blinded in the summer out of the movie theater. You come out and then your eyes start adjusting and there's a big ball of fire in the sky, like the little fire that was behind me. Are you kidding me? And animals are running around and birds are singing. And it blows your mind. And those poor people back in the cave think that those shadows are all that's are. And then, so you're a good person. So you go back down in the cave and you try to help them. And everybody says, we're locking you up. You're a nutcase. There is no other thing. And this is Plato's, Socrates' answer to why do people think philosophers are good for nothing? Why do people think philosophers are cranks? Because everybody else is living in a false reality. And they're the only ones who have seen the truth. Augustine is using the same picture when he says, I had my back to the light and my face turned towards the things which it illumined, so that my eyes, by which I saw the things which stood in the light, were themselves in darkness. Without great difficulty and without need of a teacher, I understood all that I had read on the arts of rhetoric and logic, geometry, music, and mathematics. You know this, Lord my God, because if a man is quick to understand and his perception is keen, he has those gifts from you. But since I made no offering of them to you, it did me more harm than good to struggle to keep in my own power so large a part of what you had given me. He says, just a second. Oh, I'm not going to find it. Actually, this is not where I want to talk about that yet. Hold that idea, okay? Let's move on to book 5. So Augustine loves created things. And we're going to put created things, his learning, his Aristotle's categories and everything, created things. He loves them. The Manichees, he loves them. His friend, he loved his friend. And the old Augustine writing is saying over and over, you can't be tethered to things like that. Don't tether your soul to them. But he does say at the very first chapter of book 5, he says why created things are helpful. Why? What is the good use of creation, according to Augustine? If tethering your soul to them is a bad use, what is a good use?
Wasn't it to praise God and know Him?
To praise God and know Him. Here's what he says, very end of chapter 1. For our souls lean for support upon the things which you have created, so that we may be lifted up to you from our weakness and use them to help us on our way to you who made them also wonderfully. They're a ladder. They're stepping stones to the Creator. They're not the Creator. And Paul says very much the same thing when he says, okay, I'm going to have to paraphrase because I can't. Those who were blinded because they worshipped the created things, they worshipped the creature rather than the Creator. Okay? So I was thinking, this is a gross story. The gentleman should love this. We have flies in our house. Not an inordinate amount. It's not like, a plague of Egypt. But we have flies in our house. They get in. And I don't know if you get flies in your house. Do you notice sometimes they die on the window? Do you ever? Okay. Oh, make me feel so much better. I'm like, I am the only person with dead flies that's stuck to my window. What is with that? And when you take them off, there's a little smudge. Do you ever see the smudge? Right. So my husband found out more than I ever wanted to know about this. He was like, why do flies die on the window? And smudge. Turns out, according to the internet, which never lies, I don't know what website told him this, they contract some sort of bacterium that makes them climb to a high place and die. Because sometimes they stick to the ceiling too. They die on the window, and when they die, they explode a little bit. And those are little fly explosions. I know. Now my husband refers to them as fly explosions. Like that's not, I don't love that phrase. So it makes me really want to get the Windex constantly. Like I'm cleaning the fly explosions.
Well, I was thinking we need more bacteria.
But the point of this story is this. It's a roundabout story, but maybe it will stick with you because of the weird nature of it. So now I'm looking at this window, which doesn't look outside, obviously, but it looks outside the room. Often when I look out the windows, I find myself staring at the fly explosions because now I know how gross they are and thinking that I should get the Windex. And being too lazy to because I'm reading a book and drinking my tea. It's like, yeah, I'll clean the fly explosions later. But windows are not made for me to stare at the window and the smudges on the window. They're made to look through. I'm supposed to look outside, right? I'm not, so if there were paint smeared on that window, I'm afraid I would be rather fixated on the paint. But the purpose of that window, I'm not sure what the purpose of that window is actually because it doesn't really show me anything interesting. But the purpose of that window is to look out in the hallway. And I feel like maybe creation is like that. It's not to fixate on it. And I don't mean that scientific pursuits aren't good, but I mean fixate spiritually, okay, on it. Like, I love the sun. I love the moon. I'm devoted to the flowers or whatever. Yes, it's not a pantheism. I'm supposed to look through that, not fixate on it, but look through it and see the God that made it, just like I'm supposed to see the hallway. Or I'm supposed to see, the trees in my yard, the bird feeder, not the fly explosions. And honestly, this just occurred to me. God compared to creation, like how wonderful God is compared to his creation, is like me staring at fly explosions. There are beautiful birds on my feeder and flowers are blooming outside, but I'm staring at the fly explosions. Do you know what I mean? I'm looking at the gross, much lower level thing.
So what he's trying to say there, as you using it is that the flag explosions are the things that we should focus on.
Yes.
The flowers that you must see outside that window.
Yes.
Is God who wants those.
Exactly, exactly. But Augustine is just distracted, but he's distracted by good things. Learning is good. We'll talk about that again in a minute. And people are good.
We just get obsessed with them.
We just get obsessed with them. Yeah, Kyle.
And when you're looking through a window, you see the stuff on the other side, and then you get blind to it because you see it so much. And then you start looking for the new things you see. And that might be the explosions on the window.
That might be. And I suppose in Kyle's analogy, we can become complacent about God. We can forget how wonderful he is. And sometimes we need to be reminded. So when we go through Easter, for example, when we're reminded what he's done for us, it's a good wake-up call. Or, just seeing it presented in a different way sometimes. Okay, thank you. All right, he's very devoted go ahead, Kyle, do you want to say something else?
And how each window has a different view of depending on where you stand.
It does.
It's a different perspective for each person where they stand.
And we all have a different view of God because we all have different upbringings and backgrounds and characters and personalities. And that's why we need each other. All right, this is the thing I was looking for earlier and I couldn't find it. It is in book 5, and I'm in chapter 4 now. And he's talking about the facts of science here. He's talking about scientific learning, which for them would not just be the sciences, it would also be a little bit of like natural philosophy sort of thing. And he says, this is the very beginning of chapter 4, O Lord God of truth, if a man is to please you, surely it is not enough that he should know facts like these. Even if he knows them all, he is not happy unless he knows you. But the man who knows you is happy, even if he knows none of these things. And the man who knows you and knows these things as well is none the happier for his knowing them. He is happy only because he knows you. I'm going to stop there. But I'm going to repeat a little. If he knows all these facts, he's not happy unless he knows you. If he knows you, he's happy, even if he doesn't know the other things. And if he knows you and knows the facts, he's only really happy because he knows you. Here's my question for you. Then why are we bothering to learn anything? Why don't we just study the Bible and pray and not learn math or science? Why don't we just... Ashley's like, yeah, I like that plan. Like it. What do you think, Ethan?
God made things for us to worship him. He created all these things, and us learning more about his creation is a way to glorify God through it. And of course, we're not going to know everything. We are humans. We have a short life on Earth, where we're not going to know everything. But that's how sanctification goes too. In other things, you're not going to be fully sanctified through Christ on your walk on Earth. It's just not.
No, it's not.
So.
All right. So they're stepping stones. So they are the window. I can't look through the window to God if I don't even look at the window at all?
Yeah. And if you do the opposite, and you just don't care about the things that God's created, how are you going to glorify Him? How are you going to sit in your room, do nothing, just not care about anything that God has created when you think that you love Him?
Okay, go ahead, Alex.
I guess basically with window analogy, the window, I guess we could say that is anything good that God created that we can use to see Him. And the blind things are the stuff that we should focus on, is within the clouds outside are the things that is God. And so if we don't look at the window, we're not using everything He gave us. So if we don't even look at the window or use the skills, we're not going to, we're not doing anything for Him. But if we look at the window and ignore the blind things on the window, so and we just look through to God, we're able to focus on it. There's something across the window that's in front of us. We would have to wipe that off.
Like we said, that he's given us skills. Love the Lord your God with all your mind. Mind is one of them. Mind is one of them. And so, just a second, Kyle, don't forget, but let me finish because I will forget. I was thinking, would you find it morally, would you be blamable, morally culpable, we would say, for just sitting, I don't know, becoming like a character of Wall-E, just sitting and becoming obese and eating and letting machines do everything and letting your body just disintegrate to the point where your muscles can't work anymore? I mean, I feel like God gave me a body, and I don't love exercising. I'll just tell you flat out, don't love it. Do it. I do it because God gave me a body and I'm supposed to steward it, But yet, how would that be that different letting your mind atrophy? Just taking that talent and just burying it away and just saying, I'm not gonna use my mind at all. It would just be like letting your body atrophy. What are we gonna say? Let Kyle go ahead.
There's two reasons we're here on earth: to glorify God and to get people to glorify God.
Okay.
So you can't get people to glorify God unless. So let's say I know everything about the Bible and they know everything about creation. I can't talk to them. I can't understand them unless I know both.
Mm-hmm.
And so to get people to Christ that don't know the Bible, you need to know the Word.
Very good. That's very good.
And that's what they said.
That's very good. For example, math. That it seems to be either you love it or you hate it sort of subject with people. But the ancients. So you're all familiar with the trivium, the three subjects of grammar, logic, and rhetoric that you would learn in medieval schools and in ancient schools. But then basically college level, we would say, is the quadrivium, and it's arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And that seems kind of random, why those for? Because they're all numbers. Arithmetic is number. Geometry is numbers in space. Music is numbers in time. Beats. Astronomy is numbers in space and time. The bodies are moving. See, it's all number. And so you start digging into this, and I'm not a particular math lover myself, but as I read about this, and some of you are familiar with the Fibonacci sequence, and how this is in pine cones, and all these things, numbers. I'm going to paraphrase Psalms. Numbers declare the glory of God. Because he's infinite, just like numbers. We can't ever think of the biggest number, because if you think of the biggest number, and I said, now add 1 to it, you can. You can always. Now add 1. Now add 1. And this is like our understanding of God. We'll never. So anyway, this is just an area that opens up to you, this is the world of number, and how numbers govern space and time and reality. And that I'm not well versed in. These are not my areas of love or expertise, but it's very cool. So anyway, the things that you don't love and you have to learn, maybe you can give them to God and just It is not silly, I don't think. I pray before I read. Pray before you do your math. Not that you get all the answers right, although I guess you can ask him for that. I don't think he's going to naturally give that to you without you working, though. I'm going to just tell you that. But that he would reveal himself to you in this lesson. And it says if we ask for anything according to his will, we get it. And him revealing himself to you is always in his will. I don't know, maybe that, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go there, but it just happened. Okay. Augustine has been waiting for 9 years, he said, as a Manichae, to talk to this dude, Faustus. Faustus is going to answer every question that he ever had. He says, a Manichaean bishop named Faustus had recently arrived in Carthage. Oh, I'm sorry, book 5, chapter 3. Yeah. It says, in my sight of God, I will describe the 29th year of my age. A Manichaean bishop named Faustus had recently arrived at Carthage. He was a great decoy of the devil, and many people were trapped by his charming manner of speech. This I certainly admired, but I was beginning to distinguish between mere eloquence and the real truth, which I was so eager to learn. The Manichaeans talked so much about this man Faustus that I wanted to see what scholarly fare he would lay before me, and I did not care what words he used to garnish the dish. I had already heard that he was very well versed in all the higher forms of learning, and particularly the liberal sciences. And this is the point at which he goes off on a tangent about learning. But he comes back to Faustus in chapter 6. And the second paragraph of chapter 6 says, "At last he arrived. I found him a man of agreeable personality, with a pleasant manner of speech, who pattered off the usual Manichaean arguments with a great deal more than the usual charm. But my thirst was not to be satisfied this way, however precious the cup and exquisite the man who served it." All right. And then I'm going to skip down to chapter 7. And it says, as soon as it became clear to me that Faustus was quite uninformed about the subjects in which I had expected him to be an expert, I began to lose hope that he would lift the veil and resolve the problems that would perplex me. Faustus, this answers your question. Faustus is a complete disappointment. He's a joke. He's a nice guy, but he just knows the party line. He says, this is at the end of chapter 6, the next to last paragraph for me. He had read some of Cicero's speeches, 1 or 2 books of Seneca, some poetry, and such books as had been written in good Latin by members of his sect. Besides his daily practice as a speaker, this reading was the basis of his eloquence, which derived extra charm and plausibility from his attractive personality and his ability to make good use of his mental powers. He had very sketchy education and background. He couldn't possibly answer. And Augustine gives him honor in one respect. He flat out told him, well, I don't know. I don't have any answers to questions like that. He doesn't pretend. Faustus just says, yep, this is what I know. Sorry, I don't know the answers to those. Yes. Because not everybody wants to say, I don't know. But Faustus was ready to say, yeah, never heard of that. No, know about that. And I said, that's the only good thing I can say about him. But all his hopes of becoming one of these elect Manichaeans, these people don't know anything. Their best and brightest don't know anything. So he says later in chapter 7, but once I had come to know him well, all my endeavors to make progress in the sect, as I had intended, were abandoned. I'm not really going to try to follow the Manichae. I don't know where to go. I don't know what else to follow, but I'm not doing that. But very soon he is going to find out, because he decides to go to Rome. Why does he go to Rome? This is hilarious. No. Although I'm sure it was, but that's not his main reason. In chapter 8, he says, I had heard the behavior of young students at Rome was quieter, because students at Carthage are little hooligans. It says discipline was stricter, and they were not permitted to rush insolently and just as they pleased into the lecture rooms of teachers who were not their own masters. In fact, they were not admitted at all without the master's permission. At Carthage, on the other hand, students are beyond control, and their behavior is disgraceful. They come blustering into the lecture rooms like a troop of maniacs and upset the orderly arrangements which the master has made in the interest of his pupils. This recklessness is unbelievable. And they often commit outrages which ought to be punished by law, were it not for the custom that protects them. I am fed up with these little hooligans in Carthage, and I'm going to Rome. I'm getting another job. But unfortunately, do you remember there's another problem when he gets to Rome? Do you remember what students in Rome do? They don't rush in. In chapter 12 of book 5, it says, midway down the first paragraph, true enough, I found there was no rioting by young hooligans. But I was told that at any moment a number of students would plot together to avoid paying their master his fees and would just transfer in a body to another. It's like, the free trial of whatever so you can watch The Mandalorian and then you cancel it. You know? Like, we'll just do the free trial for Augustine's classes and something, we're going to go to him. And they don't pay. Memo, there's no free trial here. You owe me money. And students would just disappear without paying their bill. Would you rather have rioting students or students who stiff you on the tuition fees? Oh, goodness. Oh my goodness. So he goes down to the beach. He goes down to the beach to get the boat to Rome. And his mom follows him. Yes. He's pretty soon he's going to say he hits his 30th year when he gets to Rome. So he's in his late 20s. I know. Well, you put all the work into putting together your lessons and everything, and then they come in and they upset stuff. And they write on the whiteboard and they erase the stuff. It's just annoying. Okay, his mom came with him. And this is, I don't know, in the middle of chapter 8. I don't know how to help you find it. I'm just going to read it. You knew, O God, why it was that I left one city and went to the other. And he does not mean the hooligan students. He means God's reasons. But you did not make the reason clear either to me or to my mother. She wept bitterly to see me go and followed me to the water's edge, clinging to me with all, or take her with me. He says, there was a reason I went to Rome. I didn't really know the real reason, and you hadn't told Mom the reason yet. But do you remember what he does to her at the harbor? The ship is delayed. And he tells his mom, there's a shrine over there where pilgrims go. Why don't you go in there and take a nap? You go take a nap. When the ship is ready, I'll come get you. He just gets on the ship and he leaves her sleeping and she wakes up and the ship is gone and her son is gone. Ditched his mother. Completely ditched his mother. Oh, yeah. I feel like that's worse than stealing the pears off the tree. That's really nasty. He ditched her. He ditched her and went to Rome. But he says there's a reason that he's heading to Rome. And so the last question I asked you is, how did God answer Monica's prayers while seeming to ignore her anguish? She's crying. My son not only has moved away, I don't know if I'll ever see him again. Accidents do happen at sea, but he just ditched me. But what happens to Augustine? In other words, who does Augustine meet in Italy that begins to turn things around? We already talked about this person once today.
Ambrose.
Ambrose. Bishop Ambrose. Augustine goes to Rome, and he hears that there's a job opening in Milan for a teacher of rhetoric and literature. And he applies for the job, he gets the job. Milan is the see of Bishop Ambrose. And he's heard that Ambrose is a pretty good talker. He says, I went to hear him. My purpose was to judge for myself whether the reports of his powers as a speaker were accurate, or whether eloquence flowed from him more or less readily than I was told. He just wants to check out his talents. Has he got skills? But you know, it's very hard to just listen to someone speak and not ever listen to what they're saying. Augustine starts going to church to listen to Ambrose speak. His mother has been crying and begging God for him to become a Christian for years. And she thinks it's the worst disaster possible that her son got on a ship and left her. It's actually the thing that's going to bring him around. Ambrose is the thing that's going to bring him around. And so when the worst seems like it's happening, hold on. It may lead to the best. When it feels like God is just not listening. Like, not only are you not making my son a Christian, but now he's leaving me. Yeah, he's leaving you because that's where he's going to become a Christian. Hold on. Wait till the story's over. Don't get up bent out of shape. It's a good lesson. It's a good lesson. Okay, Monica, though, eventually gets on a boat and comes to Italy to be with him. She forgives him. I don't know how awkward that first meeting must have been. We are not told. Don't know what she said. Shows up in Italy, and Bishop Ambrose forbade a practice that Monica often did. Do you remember what that was? This was the first question for book 6. What did she used to do? It's in chapter 2. It had been and this is book 7 now, or 6 now, I'm sorry. It had been my mother's custom in Africa to take meal cakes and bread and wine to the shrines of the saints on their memorial days, but the bishop had forbidden it. And I asked why he forbade it. Later on, he says, fear that to some they might be occasions for drunkenness, and also because they bore so close a resemblance to the superstitious rites which the pagans held in honor of their dead. Back in Africa, it was cool. We understand why you're doing this. We're having the little ceremony on their feast day. But Ambrose says, I don't like that. I don't think we're going to do that. And he says, Monica just completely obeys and gives in. You know, she's been doing this maybe for years. And it says, he says, just a second, Ethan. It seems to me my mother probably would not have given up this habit so readily if the prohibition had come from another whom she loved less dearly than Ambrose. Why does she love Ambrose so much? What did we just say Ambrose is doing for her son? It's bringing him in. She can see he's changing. And Ambrose is the tool being used. So Ambrose, you don't want me to take meal cakes and wine? You got it. It says instead she takes a heart full of praise and prayers with her. What did you want to say, Ethan?
When they say Africa, what are we talking about?
Well, Carthage. So all the North African coast. So the part of Africa that was Roman. So the whole north, the Mediterranean coast of Africa. But not like sub-Saharan, not, because they didn't even really have that explored yet. So, but technically it's Africa, so. And they knew it was a separate continent. They just didn't know the extent. Augustine still, though, I mean, he's listening to Ambrose. And then on chapter 3, I've told you guys this story. Some of you may have heard it more than once from me. This is the episode where it says, Augustine really wanted to go talk to Ambrose and ask him some questions, but Ambrose was always busy. And then when he wasn't busy, he'd read. And he said it was just the weirdest thing, you know, how he'd just sit with a book. And his eyes moved over the page, you know. But he didn't talk. What's that about? It's called silent reading, Augustine. People didn't read silently to themselves back then. It was an anomaly. No, everybody read out loud to yourself. You go in your bedroom and you read out loud. He said, When he read, his eyes scanned the page, and his heart explored the meaning, but his voice was silent and his tongue was still. And Augustine says, what's that about? And he said, perhaps he was afraid that if he read aloud, people might ask him questions about what he was reading. Or maybe he thought he was reading complicated stuff that would be hard to explain to beginners. Maybe he thought he needed to spare his voice because he did a lot of speaking. He says, whatever his reason, we can be sure it was a good one. Augustine is flabbergasted by the fact that this man reads silently to himself. We, on the other hand, would probably be flabbergasted if you visited my house and you found me sitting in the living room all by myself, reading out loud to myself. However, you might want to try it sometime. It does make you slow down, but that's not always a bad thing. When you read out loud, it really changes your perception of what you're reading. So give it a trial sometime when you're not hurried. You don't have like Herodotus to read. Don't read Herodotus out loud to yourself. That will take forever.
And then try to understand the meaning.
Yes. Augustine, though, has a stumbling block. And it's a stumbling block that a lot of people share today, I think. We can keep this in mind when we're, apologetics or evangelism. He wants to understand everything. Before he takes a step forward and says, I'm going to be a Christian, I need to have all my questions answered and I need to understand everything. And he says this in chapter 4. It's almost towards the end. It's like several sentences before the end. He said, if I had been able to believe, I might have been cured. Because in my mind's eye, I should have had a clearer vision. He says, I wanted to understand everything so I could believe. But as it so happened, I needed to believe first so I could start understanding. Until I took the step forward and believed and trusted, I couldn't really understand. And he says, and this is what I asked you. I said, how does he overcome his demand? He realizes something. All day, every day, I run around doing things on faith. Heck, I believe Augustine wrote this book on faith. It's got his name on it. People who are authorities tell me it seems like Augustine's writing, the authority of the centuries that copied this book. But basically, I don't know. I didn't see him write it. It's faith. Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. Faith. I didn't see it. Books tell me. Right? I mean, I vaguely know how electricity works, but I flip the switch and the light comes on. It's faith. I believe it's not going to burn my house down. Hopefully, I trust the people who put the electric wires in my house. It's faith. Constantly, we're doing things on faith. And Augustine suddenly realized all these books he reads, I'm believing these people. Why do I believe Julius Caesar was assassinated on March 15th, 44 BC? Somebody told me, and I believe him. He said, but yet these people tell me these things, and I refuse to believe them. And this was a big hurdle for him. And I do think there are a lot of people, they want all their questions answered today. We're a very science-loving culture, right? We want to know the nuts and bolts of how everything works, and we just want the facts. There's an old TV show, older than me, it was before my time, and there's a detective, a police detective, just the facts, ma'am. He would have his little notepad, just facts, ma'am. That was his catchphrase. That's what people want, just facts. But a lot of the things we consider facts, we just believe them because somebody told us they were true. And we think the authority of that person is reasonable enough to believe it. Augustine gets this epiphany, like, oh, I think maybe Ambrose is one of those authorities I could trust. He's an intelligent man. He's well-read. Ambrose's backstory, he was not a church member at all. He was friendly to Christianity. I'm not sure he was actually a Christian. And the bishop of Milan died, and they needed a new bishop, and there were two rival factions. And finally, somebody grabbed Ambrose and said, Ambrose is a good guy, let's have him. And they just rushed him through, and he was amenable to it. And obviously, a believer, whether he had made a profession of faith at that point or not, they rushed him through priesthood and everything and got him to bishop status. So he had an educated background. And Augustine says, I can believe Ambrose, just like I believe all these other things. Okay, last question I asked you. He saw a drunk beggar on the street, laughing, having a good time. And he learned a lesson from this beggar, and he tried to communicate it to his friends. What did this drunk beggar teach him? I am in chapter 6. Do you remember? I'm going to go halfway through paragraph 2 of chapter 6. Sadly, I turned to my companions and spoke to them of all the pain and trouble which is caused by our own folly. My ambitions had placed a load of misery on my shoulders, and the further I carried it, the heavier it became. But the only purpose of all the efforts we made was to reach the goal of peaceful happiness. This beggar had already reached it before us, and perhaps we would never reach it at all. I am working my behind off to learn, to study, to make a name for myself, to find a place in the world, to make cash. Why? So I can retire? So I can have some sort of peaceful leisure? This guy has it now, straight out of a bottle. He's just laying there laughing, lounging around, and having a good time. What do I get that he doesn't get? Yes.
I would have chosen to be myself on the anxieties and fears. What an absurd choice. Surely it could not be the right one, for I ought not to have put myself above him on the ground and being better educated, a matter from which I was deriving no pleasure. My education enabled me to seek to please men, not to impart to them any instruction, but merely to purvey pleasure. For that reason, you broke my bones.
He says, you might say that beggar doesn't have true joy. And he says, mine was not true honor any more than the beggar's was true joy. So am I giving you a picture of Augustine? He's listening to Ambrose. He started out by just wanting to check out the guy's speaking skills, but he's listening to what he's saying. Things he's saying are getting through. And then he's starting to have these little epiphanies like, you know what, I trust what people tell me all the time and believe it on faith. You know what? I'm working so hard. I am so stressed. That guy's not stressed. He's perfectly content. And like he's in red, if you asked me, do you want to be happy? I'd say yes. But if you asked me, would you rather be him or yourself? Like I would pick myself. Even though he's totally not stressed and seems happy right now, and I'm not happy and very stressed. But my honor isn't real honor any more than his joy is true joy. Okay. These things, these thoughts are swirling around. Augustine is not a sudden convert, if you know what I mean. This is taking years of methodically thinking things over and God bringing things to his attention. I'm going to end with the last story that's in book 6. I did not ask you a question about it. He has a friend named Alypius. Alypius he knew him as a child in Carthage, in Tagaste, too, their hometown. And he came with him to Italy. And Alypius loved the chariot races, the games. And he was sitting, I'm just going to paraphrase this instead of finding it and reading it. He was sitting in Augustine's lecture once, and Augustine said, it occurred to me that a wonderful analogy would be the games. And it would give me a chance to give an analogy for my teaching and also sort of make fun of the people that love the games. And he said, I really wasn't thinking about Alypius. I forgot that he was somebody who loved the games. So he said some, he trash talked people who love the games a little bit. And Alypius, instead of being angry, takes it to heart. It's like, shoot, that's what Augustine thinks about people who love the games. And, I think he's right. And he stops going because he doesn't want to be as idiotic as the picture that Augustine painted. However, Alypius has some friends, and they invite him to the gladiator shows, which apparently is different than the games for Augustine. I think that's chariot races and things like this. This is the gladiator sports. This is the blood sports. And it says, in a friendly way, they brushed aside his resistance and stubborn protests and carried him off to the arena. You may drag me there bodily, he protested, but do you imagine you can make me watch the show and give my mind to it? I shall be there, but it will be just as if I were not present, and I shall prove myself stronger than you or the games. So they go, and he's just like, not watching, I won't watch. And suddenly something happened, and the crowd let out a roar. And he wanted to see, what is it? What is it? And it says he was confident that if he saw whatever it was, he would find it repulsive and remain master of himself. So he opened his eyes, and his soul was stabbed with a wound more deadly than any which the gladiator, whom he was so anxious to see, had received in his body. He fell, and fell more pitifully than the man whose fall had drawn that roar of excitement from the crowd. The din had pierced his ears and forced him to open his eyes, laying his soul open to receive the wound which struck it down. This was presumption, not courage. The weakness of his soul was in relying on itself instead of trusting in you. When he saw the blood, it was as though he had drunk a deep draught of savage passion. Instead of turning away, he fixed his eyes upon the scene and drank it in all its frenzy, unaware of what he was doing. Alypius becomes addicted to the gladiator shows. Every bit as much, I think, as we talk about, addictions to pornography or the things that we expose our eyes to. And I'm kind of being preachy and mommy, but we have to be careful what we put before our eyes. And it says in Scripture, I will put no evil thing before my eyes. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. Probably in the last month, I've watched stuff I shouldn't have watched, like movies that were not good for me. And I'm not talking about being a Puritan, and I'm not here to just, shame you because you watched this or did that. I'm not about that, right? But it catches you before you know you're caught. And that's how people fall into these things. Alypius did. He started dragging other people to the gladiator shows. He's eventually cured of it, but not without a lot of prayer. And, once you love something like that, it's really hard to let it go. You can all probably imagine something. I mean, maybe some of you have a vice, secretly or openly, and it's probably something you shouldn't do. But it's like, oh, but I like it so much, I don't want to give it up. Most of us don't go through life without having something like that. That, oh, dang, I don't want to give that up. That's going to hurt. But Alypius gave it up eventually. So anyway, thank you for letting me mom you and preach to you about what you watch. But I'm momming myself too. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't go away. It's not like you're a grown-up and now you get to look at anything you want. Not a good idea ever. Yes, Kyle. Oh, you know what? It's 11:48, so I'm going to let you go, but remind me next week. Or if we don't have time at all to watch it, I'll send you a link and you can watch it. It's like a minute and a half. You can find it on Google. All right, thanks, guys. Oh, we're finish confessions. And if you didn't turn in, the Crea, bring that next week. All right, or email it to me if you've got computer issues. Have a good week, guys.
Thank you, Mom.